Queen Salvana stood alone in the vast chamber of the Zerin palace, her towering figure casting a shadow on the ornate crystal walls. The court, once filled with admirers and loyal subjects, was now empty. Only the faint hum of the building's energy conduits kept her company. Her once proud empire had turned its back on her, branding her a failure. Her heart felt as heavy as the golden crest she wore, its once gleaming surface now dull from neglect. The Zerin were known throughout the galaxy as a proud and powerful species, their royal line held in awe for their unique bonding ability. A Zerin ruler was expected to find a mate, to form a bond that would enhance their psychic strength and unify their people. But Salvana had not bonded, no matter how many suitors she encountered. Kings, nobles, warriors, none had managed to connect with her. Now, the Council of Elders had declared that she must step down. They whispered that she was incomplete, that her inability to bond made her unfit to rule. The thought of exile was unbearable. Without her position, without her people, what would she be? An outcast, a figure of pity. For a Zerin queen, that was a fate worse than death. In the depths of her despair, she had heard rumors of a visitor from Earth. The humans were newcomers to the interstellar stage, their presence tolerated more out of curiosity than respect. To the Zerin, humans were weak, fragile, and short-lived. Yet this human, Leon Carter, was different. A seasoned diplomat and former soldier, he had earned a reputation as a skilled negotiator and problem solver. When Leon arrived at the Zerin capital, he was greeted not with fanfare, but with skepticism. His plain, utilitarian clothing and calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the opulent, shimmering attire of the Zerin elite. The council barely acknowledged him, and most of the courtiers ignored him altogether. But Leon had not come for glory. He was here to discuss peace, trade, and cooperation between Earth and Zerin, a mission that required him to meet with the Queen herself. Salvana, curious about this human, granted him an audience. When he stepped into the throne chamber, she studied him carefully. He was unremarkable by Zerin standards. No shimmering scales, no glowing eyes, no psychic aura. Yet his gaze was steady, and he carried himself with quiet confidence. He bowed politely and introduced himself. As they spoke, Salvana found herself drawn to his straightforward manner. He treated her not as a failing queen, but as a leader who still had value. He did not flinch under her piercing gaze or falter when she asked difficult questions. For the first time in many cycles, she felt that someone truly listened to her, not as a queen, but as a person. Their conversation soon turned to the state of her kingdom. Salvana hesitated to reveal her plight, but Leon's genuine curiosity and calm presence encouraged her to speak. She explained how her people had lost faith in her, how the council demanded her abdication, and how she was seen as incomplete. Leon listened carefully, his brow furrowing, as she described the traditions and pressures she faced. When she finished, Leon took a deep breath. "Your Majesty," he said, "it sounds like your people judge you by a standard that doesn't truly define who you are. They value the bond above all else. But what about your leadership, your wisdom, and your strength? If you can't find a bond among your kind, perhaps it's not because you're lacking. Maybe you simply need a different perspective." Salvana tilted her head, intrigued. A different perspective. Leon nodded. "Back on Earth, we've faced challenges that seemed impossible at first. But humans adapt. We find solutions in unexpected places. What if your bond isn't meant to be with a Zerin? What if the answer lies beyond tradition?" The suggestion was so startling that Salvana couldn't respond immediately. The idea of bonding with a non-Zerin was unheard of, almost absurd. Yet Leon's calm, steady tone made it sound reasonable. He wasn't mocking her or challenging her authority. He was offering her a chance to see things differently. Before the Queen could answer, the chamber doors opened, and the Council of Elders strode in. Their faces were stern, their postures rigid. The senior elder, a tall figure adorned with gleaming ceremonial armor, stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he declared, his voice cold. Your time is up. Have you found a bond, or do you accept exile? Zalvanna turned her gaze back to Leon. His calm expression hadn't changed. He offered a small, encouraging nod, as if to say, "This is your choice." The queen's mind raced. Tradition demanded a bond, yet this human offered a new possibility. Could she defy centuries of custom? Could she risk everything for a chance to remain on her throne? Not by the old ways, but by proving her worth in a way no Zarin ever had before. As the council waited impatiently, Zalvanna drew herself up, her golden crest catching the chamber's light. "Elders," she said, her voice steady, "I have not found a bond among my people, but I believe the solution lies elsewhere." Her declaration left the chamber in stunned silence. The Zarin queen, rejected by all, had just taken the first step toward forging a new path, one that would change both her destiny and her kingdom's future. The chamber grew silent. Queen Zalvanna's words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. The elders stared at her as if she had spoken a language they did not understand. The eldest among them, His High Eminence Drakul, finally broke the stillness. "What do you mean elsewhere, Your Majesty?" His voice carried a note of disdain, though he masked it with the formality expected of his rank. "Are you suggesting that your bond might come from another species? From—" He turned his gaze to Leon Carter, who stood at the base of the dais, silent but attentive. "From a human?" Zalvanna straightened, though her internal turmoil was not so easily hidden. She could feel the weight of the council's judgment, but she also felt a strange sense of determination growing within her. For so long, she had tried to conform to the expectations of her people, to prove her worth by the standards they revered. Yet time after time, those efforts had failed. Now, with no other path left, she found herself considering the unimaginable. "This human," she began carefully, "has brought new perspectives to our discussions. He sees potential where we see failure. He considers possibilities we have never explored. And that," Drakul interrupted, "is precisely why the humans are so dangerous. They are impulsive, reckless, willing to tamper with sacred traditions." Leon cleared his throat but remained calm. "With respect, Elder," he said, his voice measured, "traditions are only sacred until they fail to serve the people. Then they become obstacles. I don't claim to understand the full depth of your customs, but I do know that sometimes the boldest solutions come from rethinking what we consider unchangeable." Several of the younger counselors murmured quietly. Drakul's glare darkened, but he said nothing for the moment. Zalvanna took a step forward, descending the dais so she stood at Leon's side. The chamber was still, the faint hum of the energy conduits the only sound. She placed her hands behind her back, a gesture of thoughtfulness rather than defensiveness. "What I propose is not an abandonment of our culture," she said. "It is an expansion. For centuries, the Zarin have relied on one way of ruling, one way of forming the bonds that strengthen us. And yet here I stand, a queen rejected by her own people, because that one way failed to align with my existence." Her eyes swept over the council. "Does that mean I am unworthy? Or does it mean our traditions, as revered as they are not infallible? Are we truly so afraid of new ideas that we would rather see our queen cast into exile than allow the possibility of another way?" Leon said nothing, letting her words speak for themselves. He could see the tension in her stance, the controlled intensity in her voice. She was not pleading for mercy. She was demanding consideration. A younger counselor, one who had remained silent thus far, stepped forward. Her name was Kelevas, and though her position in the council was not as high-ranking as Drakul's, her voice carried weight among the less conservative members. "Your Majesty," Kelevas said, "if you believe this human can provide a solution, then what is your proposal? Are you asking us to simply accept his presence as proof of a bond?" "No," Zalvanna replied. "I am asking for the opportunity to prove that a bond can be formed through understanding, through shared purpose and mutual respect. I will undergo a trial. Let this council set the conditions. Let the elders observe. But if Leon and I can demonstrate a connection, one that empowers me as ruler, then perhaps you will see that our traditions can evolve rather than be abandoned." Durakel scoffed. "A trial to test a human's compatibility with a Zerin queen. This is madness." Or, Kelvas countered, "It could be the first step toward a stronger future. We cannot deny that our traditions have left us without a bonded queen, and if our queen is willing to risk herself in this trial, should we not at least consider the possibility?" The chamber was silent once again. Zelvanna kept her gaze steady, her posture firm. Leon remained at her side, his expression calm, but his mind racing. He had not expected to be drawn into this level of political turmoil. Yet here he was, standing beside a queen whose courage and determination were beginning to stir something within him. This was no longer just a diplomatic mission. This was about survival, hers and possibly his. After what felt like an eternity, Durakel gave a reluctant nod. "Very well. We will draft the conditions for this trial, but let it be known, failure will result in immediate exile. If you wish to wager everything on this human, Your Majesty, then you must be prepared to accept the consequences." "I accept," Zelvanna said without hesitation. Her voice was steady, though her heart was pounding. She glanced at Leon, and for the first time, allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. Leon gave her a slight nod, his way of saying, "I'm with you." Together, they would face whatever came next. The council chambers buzzed with quiet, uneasy energy. Preparations for the trial had begun. Elders shuffled parchment-like displays, updating records that hadn't been touched in centuries. Younger officials adjusted surveillance drones to capture every angle, ensuring that the trial's outcome would be unquestionable. Overseeing it all was High Elder Durakel, his stern gaze scanning the room as if daring someone to protest his authority. Queen Zelvanna stood near the center of the room, her composure unbroken. Her golden crest caught the light, casting a faint shimmer on the polished stone floor. Though her posture was regal, her thoughts churned. The trial would not be a simple test. It would be rigorous, a challenge designed to expose any weakness in her claim to the throne. Worse still, it would scrutinize the bond, or lack thereof, between her and Leon Carter. Leon, now familiar with the curious and wary stares of the Zerin, approached her. He was dressed in the diplomatic uniform Earth had provided him, its muted tones and simple cut in sharp contrast to the elaborate garb of the Zerin. He gave her a nod. "Your Majesty, you look calm. Is that for their benefit or mine?" Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Perhaps a bit of both, Leon. But appearances matter here. If I look uncertain, they will smell blood in the water." Leon glanced toward the Elder Council. "They don't seem thrilled about giving us this chance." "They're not," Zelvanna admitted. "But they also can't afford to appear as though they refuse all innovation. If they flatly rejected the trial, it would show weakness. At least now, they can claim they followed procedure. And if we succeed," her smile grew, "then they'll have no choice but to acknowledge us." As the final preparations were made, Durakel stepped forward. His voice carried effortlessly through the chamber, amplified not by technology, but by a lifetime of commanding respect. "The trial will consist of 3 challenges. The first will test the Queen's leadership, forcing her to make difficult decisions under pressure. The second will measure the human's compatibility with Zerin bonding rituals, to determine if he can provide the mental and emotional support necessary for our monarch. The third will be a test of their shared resolve. Should they fail any step, the trial is over." Zelvanna inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the elder's words. "And if we succeed, if you succeed," Durakel said slowly, "then we will have no choice but to acknowledge a human bond as valid. But the odds are against you, Your Majesty. I hope you understand what's at stake." "I do," she replied firmly. Leon stood at her side, silent but attentive. His role in this was uncertain, yet he felt the weight of it just the same. He wasn't a king, or a prince, or even a noble. He was a diplomat from a planet that barely knew the extent of the galaxy's vast politics. And yet here he was, about to face a series of tests that could define not only Sylvana's future, but the perception of humanity itself. The first challenge began in a chamber that resembled a battlefield, though no weapons were involved. A holographic interface presented Sylvana with a crisis scenario. A neighboring empire had cut off vital resources to Zaren's colonies, demanding tribute in exchange for resuming trade. Sylvana had to make swift, strategic decisions to secure her people's future without plunging them into war. As she navigated the scenario, Leon offered quiet insights, pointing out options she might have missed. Together, they worked through the challenge, Sylvana's leadership shining through as she balanced diplomacy and strength. When the scenario concluded, Duracle nodded begrudgingly. The Queen has demonstrated her ability to lead under pressure. She passes the first challenge. The second challenge was more personal. In a room adorned with ancient bonding crystals, Sylvana and Leon were seated across from each other, their hands resting on a smooth, glowing surface. This test required them to open their minds to one another, to find a connection that had so far eluded her and every Zarian partner she had known. Sylvana closed her eyes, focusing her thoughts, while Leon followed her lead. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the crystals. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, a flicker of light danced between the crystals. A faint sensation passed through Leon's mind, like a whisper, soft and fleeting. It wasn't the full bond the Zarin expected, but it was something. The observers leaned in, their expressions shifting from skepticism to surprise. Even Duracle could not fully mask his shock. "The connection is incomplete," the elder said, "but it exists. This has never happened with a human before." The second challenge is passed. The final test was the hardest. Sylvana and Leon were placed under extreme mental pressure, waves of conflicting emotions and chaotic images projected into their minds. They had to remain steady, to support each other through the storm. Sylvana's determination and Leon's quiet strength held them together, each drawing on the other's resolve. When the storm subsided, they stood together, shaken but unbroken. Duracle stepped forward, his voice heavy. "Against all expectations, you have passed all 3 challenges. The Council will convene to discuss the outcome, but for now, the trial is complete." Sylvana and Leon exchanged a glance. The hardest part was behind them, but the fight for their future was far from over. The chamber buzzed with tension as the elders convened. The trial was over, but the most crucial step remained: the Council's deliberation. Sylvana and Leon stood silently near the dais, awaiting the verdict. The elder council members gathered in a circle, their shimmering robes reflecting the soft glow of the room's energy conduits. High Elder Duracle presided at the center, his expression as unreadable as ever. Leon kept his stance steady, though his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He had no idea what to expect. The trials had pushed him to his limits, and even now, the faint sensation of that strange, fleeting bond lingered at the edge of his awareness. He glanced at Sylvana. She appeared calm, her golden crest gleaming under the chamber lights, but he could see the tension in her posture, the slight clenching of her hands behind her back. Finally, Duracle spoke. His voice carried through the chamber like the toll of a bell. "The Council has deliberated. We have considered the unprecedented events of the trial, as well as the implications of this human-Zarin connection. This is not a decision we take lightly." He paused, allowing his words to settle. The chamber was silent except for the faint hum of the energy conduits. "Queen Sylvana has demonstrated her ability to lead under pressure," he continued. "She has shown resilience, strategic thinking, and determination. Furthermore, the second challenge revealed a level of connection between her and this human, unlike any bond previously recorded. While it is not the traditional bond our people have relied upon, it is undeniable that a bond exists." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some counselors exchanged surprised glances, while others nodded in acknowledgement. Leon remained still, waiting. However, Heracle added, "This does not mean the Council is ready to fully embrace such a drastic deviation from our customs. While the trial has proven that Queen Sylvana and her human companion can endure, it has not erased the doubts and fears that many of us hold. As such, we cannot reinstate Queen Sylvana's full authority without certain conditions." Sylvana inclined her head slightly, her expression controlled. "What conditions, High Elder?" Heracle's gaze shifted to Leon. "If the human diplomat, Leon Carter, is willing to remain on Zerin Prime as your consort, if he agrees to further trials to strengthen this bond, then we will allow you to retain your position as queen. But this must be a mutual commitment. It must be more than a formality." Leon felt a dozen sets of eyes on him. He hadn't anticipated this turn of events. In his mind, his mission had been simple: negotiate peace, represent Earth's interests, and return home. Now he was being asked to stay, to become part of a foreign society that viewed him as an outsider. He looked at Sylvana, her gaze steady and calm despite the enormous stakes. For a brief moment, they exchanged an unspoken understanding. He knew what this meant for her. If he agreed, she could remain queen, keep her people united, and carve a new path forward. If he declined, she would lose everything. "I'm willing," Leon said, his voice firm. "I'll stay." Another murmur rippled through the council. Heracle raised a hand to silence it. "Very well. The council will continue to monitor your progress, Queen Sylvana. We will expect regular updates on the development of this bond and its effects on your leadership. Should you fail to meet these conditions, the council will reconsider your position." Sylvana inclined her head. "Understood, High Elder. I accept the conditions." The tension in the chamber began to ease, though Leon could still feel the weight of countless eyes on him. This was far from over. They had secured a temporary reprieve, but the path ahead would be filled with challenges. He wasn't just a diplomat anymore. He was now a key figure in an unfolding story that could reshape relations between humans and Zerin. As the council dispersed, Sylvana turned to him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This is only the beginning." Leon nodded. "I know, but we'll face whatever comes next together." They left the chamber side by side, their steps echoing in the grand halls of the palace. Though their journey had just begun, one thing was clear. They were no longer merely a queen and a diplomat. They were partners in a shared destiny, walking a road no one had ever traveled before. The days that followed were filled with quiet determination. Queen Sylvana and Leon Carter now had an opportunity to strengthen their bond, though the path forward was anything but clear. The council's conditions weighed heavily on them both. Sylvana's role as queen depended on their success, while Leon was thrust deeper into an alien world he still struggled to fully understand. Sylvana spent her mornings in the council chamber, attending meetings and ensuring the day-to-day governance of her people. Though she was still the queen in title, the council's influence had grown considerably. Every decision she made seemed to be under constant scrutiny. The elders watched her closely, seeking any sign of weakness or hesitation. It was exhausting, but Sylvana refused to show it. Leon, on the other hand, spent much of his time adapting to life among the Zerin. Their customs, their language, their way of thinking, all of it was foreign to him. Still, he approached the situation with the same quiet resilience that had helped him survive the trials. He was a stranger in this land, but he understood the importance of his role. If this bond was to succeed, he would need to meet the Zerin halfway. One afternoon, Sylvana invited Leon to the palace gardens. It was a rare moment of privacy. No counselors, no aides, no hovering surveillance drones. The gardens were lush and vibrant, filled with plants that shimmered faintly under the planet's twin suns. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of alien flowers that Leon couldn't name but found oddly pleasant. Sylvana walked slowly along a winding path, her hands clasped behind her back. Leon followed a few steps behind, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. Finally, she stopped and turned to face him. "You've been quiet these past few days," she said. Her tone wasn't accusatory, just observant. "What's on your mind?" Leon hesitated. He'd been turning over 1,000 thoughts in his head since the council's verdict. How to approach this bond. How to truly connect with someone so different from himself. And what would happen if they failed? "I've been trying to figure out how to do this," he admitted. "Your people have this deep, instinctive way of connecting, and I'm just human. I don't even know where to start." Zalvanna tilted her head, a faint smile touching her lips. "Perhaps we start with something simple," she said. "Tell me about your home. Tell me about Earth." Leon blinked, surprised by the request. "Earth? What do you want to know?" "Anything," Zalvanna said, gesturing for him to sit on a low stone bench. "I've read reports about your world, of course. I've seen images. But I want to hear about it from you. What does it feel like? What do you love about it?" He sat down, pausing for a moment to gather his thoughts. How could he describe something as vast and varied as Earth to someone who had never seen it? He decided to start small. "Well," he began, "Earth has a lot of different landscapes. Where I grew up, there were wide open fields. Grass so green it almost hurt your eyes, stretching as far as you could see. And the sky." He looked up at the alien sky, so different from his own. "On a clear day, it's this endless blue. But the best part is at night. You can see the stars so clearly. Sometimes it feels like you can reach out and touch them." Zalvanna listened intently, her expression thoughtful. "It sounds beautiful," she said. "I imagine it must feel comforting." "It is," Leon said. "When I was younger, I used to lie in the grass and just watch the clouds roll by. It made everything else seem so small. Like, no matter how tough things got, the sky would always be there." Zalvanna nodded slowly. "I understand that feeling. For me, it was the sea. When I was a child, before I became queen, I would visit the coastal cliffs. The sound of the waves, the endless expanse of water, it made me feel free. Even when I became queen, I would think of that place whenever I felt trapped." Leon smiled. "I guess we're not so different, then." She returned the smile. "No, we're not." For a while, they sat together, sharing stories of their worlds, their childhoods, and the moments that shaped them. The bond they sought didn't form instantly. It wasn't some magical, sudden connection. Instead, it grew slowly, piece by piece, as they began to understand each other not as a human and a Zarin, but simply as two individuals who had lived, struggled, and found solace in the simple things. As the suns began to set, painting the garden in shades of gold and crimson, Zalvanna stood. "Thank you, Leon," she said softly. This was a good start." He nodded. "Yeah, I think so too." Their path forward was still uncertain, but for the first time, they both felt like it was a path worth walking. Together. Over the following weeks, Zalvanna and Leon spent more time together, sharing stories, learning from each other, and trying to understand the mysterious connection they had begun to form. The council had given them permission to remain on Zarin Prime under strict conditions, but there was no guarantee they would allow it to continue. Every moment they shared felt both precious and precarious. Zalvanna often invited Leon to her private study, a quiet chamber filled with old texts, shimmering artifacts, and a large viewing screen that displayed an endless field of stars. There, they would sit and talk, sometimes for hours. They spoke not just of politics or customs, but of life, fears, and the burdens they each carried. "I always thought the hardest part of being queen would be the decisions," Zalvanna confessed one evening as she gazed at the stars. "I imagined sitting on the throne, weighing options, finding solutions, but it's not the decisions that weigh on me. It's the doubt, the fear that no matter what I choose, it will never be enough for my people." Leon, sitting across from her with a cup of Zerin tea in hand, nodded slowly. I think anyone in your position would feel that way. Leaders are expected to be perfect, but no one really is. Back on Earth, I served as a military officer before I became a diplomat. I had to make decisions that kept my people safe. I always wondered if I could have done more, if there was a better choice I didn't see. Do you still feel that way? Helvanna asked, her voice softer now. Sometimes, Leon admitted, but I learned something from it. Doubt doesn't mean you're weak. It means you care. It means you're not so full of yourself that you can't see other perspectives. Zalvanna smiled faintly. That's an oddly comforting thought. As the days passed, their conversations became more natural. The initial formality faded, replaced by a genuine friendship. Zalvanna began to see Leon not as an outsider, but as someone who truly wanted to understand her and her people. In turn, Leon found himself appreciating Zalvanna's wisdom and resilience. She was not just a queen struggling to meet impossible expectations. She was a person, trying her best in a difficult situation. One afternoon, Zalvanna decided to show Leon something she had never shared with anyone else. She led him through the palace corridors, past grand halls and ornate chambers, until they reached a small, unassuming door. Beyond it lay a hidden garden, smaller than the main palace gardens, but far more intimate. It was her sanctuary, a place she had come to during her most difficult moments. The garden was filled with plants that shimmered faintly in shades of blue and green. A small fountain in the center produced a gentle, musical trickle. The air was calm and cool, carrying the faint scent of flowers that only bloomed under Zerin's twin suns. This was my mother's garden, Zalvanna explained as they walked among the flowers. She created it as a place of peace, away from the politics and pressures of court. I come here when I need to think, or when I need to remember what I'm fighting for. Leon stopped beside a large blooming plant that seemed to glow softly from within. It's beautiful, he said. No wonder you find peace here. Zalvanna sat on a stone bench near the fountain, gesturing for him to sit as well. I wanted to bring you here because I feel this garden represents what we're trying to do. It's something that doesn't quite fit the rest of the palace. It's different. It's quiet, and yet it has its own strength. Leon sat beside her, nodding. I think I understand. This bond we're working on, it doesn't follow your traditions. It's not what anyone expected. But that doesn't mean it can't be something real. Something strong. She looked at him then, her golden crest catching the light. You see, Leon, you speak of understanding as if it's so simple. But to me, it's extraordinary. My own people look at me and see failure. You look at me and see possibility. That difference, it gives me hope. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the gentle sound of the fountain filling the space between them. They were two individuals from entirely different worlds, but in that moment, they felt connected. Not through the traditional Zerin bond, but through trust, respect, and a shared determination to create something new. As the suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant shades of orange and purple, thank you, Leon, for being willing to walk this path with me. He stood as well, his voice steady. We're not there yet, but I think we're getting closer. Together, they left the garden, their steps echoing softly in the empty halls. Though their journey was far from over, each day brought them closer to building a bond that could redefine both of their futures. Time had passed, though neither Zalvanna nor Leon could say exactly how long. The council's decision to let them remain was always in the back of their minds, but over the weeks, it began to feel less like a temporary reprieve and more like a fragile foundation on which to build something lasting. Each day brought new challenges. The elders closely monitored Zalvanna's rule, scrutinizing every decree, every judgment she made. They noted how she handled disputes, allocated resources, and dealt with the complexities of interstellar trade. And of course, they paid close attention to Leon. Though he held no official rank within Zerin society, Leon had become a constant presence in the Queen's daily routine. He accompanied her to meetings and often offered observations that, while unconventional, helped smooth over disputes or uncover solutions the Zerin hadn't considered. It was clear to many that the human's perspective was influencing Sylvanas' decisions, not in a way that overruled her authority, but in a way that complemented her leadership. Some council members grumbled privately. Drakel was among them, though he refrained from open confrontation. He saw the growing respect for Leon among the younger councillors, and it troubled him. The old ways were shifting. The council's control over the Queen was weakening, not through rebellion, but through the natural process of Sylvana becoming a stronger, more confident leader. One evening, Sylvana and Leon met once again in her private garden. The twin suns had set, and the air was cool and still. They sat near the fountain, its soft trickle a comforting backdrop. The plants glowed faintly in the moonlight, casting the garden in a soft blue hue. "I think the council is starting to believe in us," Sylvana said, her voice calm but thoughtful. "Even Drakel hasn't challenged me outright in weeks. He still watches closely, but I sense his resolve is weakening." Leon leaned back, resting his arms on the bench. "You've proven yourself as a leader. You've shown them you can adapt, grow, and lead in ways they never expected. They'd be foolish to ignore that." She looked at him, a small smile forming. "And you? How do you feel about all this? You've been thrown into a world that must seem so alien, yet you've managed to help me in ways I never anticipated." He gave a small shrug. "It's not easy, but I've learned a lot. At first, I thought I was just here to help keep the peace, to make sure Earth and Zerin stayed on good terms. But now," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "now I feel like I'm part of something bigger. Like maybe my place isn't back on Earth after all." Sylvana's smile widened, a genuine expression of gratitude and relief. "You've become more than a diplomat, Leon. You've become a partner. Someone I can rely on, someone who understands me in a way no one else has." There was a quiet moment between them, the sound of the fountain filling the space. Neither of them spoke, but they didn't need to. The bond they had worked so hard to forge was no longer a question. It was a reality. The next day, Sylvana called a special meeting of the council. Leon stood at her side as she addressed the elders, her voice clear and steady. She spoke of the progress they had made, the decisions that had strengthened the kingdom, and the challenges they had overcome. She reminded them of the trials she and Leon had passed and pointed to the results they had achieved together. "I have proven my ability to lead," Sylvana said, "and I have done so not by abandoning our traditions, but by evolving them. This human, Leon Carter, is not a weakness. He is a strength. Together, we have shown that Zerin leadership can adapt, grow, and thrive. The bond we share may not be what you are used to, but it is no less real. It is no less meaningful." There was a moment of silence after her speech. Drakel looked as though he wanted to argue, but he said nothing. Kelvas, the younger counselor who had supported Sylvana from the beginning, stepped forward. "Your Majesty," she said, "you have proven yourself, and your bond with this human has shown us a path forward we never imagined. I support your leadership and recognize Leon Carter as your partner in this new era." One by one, the other council members voiced their agreement. Even Drakel, begrudgingly, gave his nod of approval. As the meeting concluded, Sylvana turned to Leon. "We did it," she said softly. He nodded. "No, you did it. I just helped along the way." She shook her head, her gaze warm. "No, Leon. We did it. Together." In that moment, as the council members filed out, and the chamber fell quiet, both Sylvana and Leon knew that their journey was far from over, but they also knew that they would face whatever came next as partners, united, strong, and ready to forge a future no one had ever dared to imagine.